right, everyone, it's the top of the hour, so let's get started. But before I introduce our guest of honor today, Shaun Lether, I just want to go over a couple of quick things. We will be recording this presentation to put up on our YouTube channel in the near future. Those of you who are joining us in person, if you'd like to ask a question, you can come up to the mic, or you can just write a question on the pad and hand it to me. Those of you who are joining us online, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do it in one of two ways. You can raise your hand, in which case you'll be live on camera and we'll be able to see you. Or if you'd rather protect your privacy, what we can do is you can send us a question through the chat, and then I will ask Shaun in due time. Those are just some of the ground rules. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. It is a great pleasure to have Shaun join us. I met Shaun in person back in 2023 when IANDS had its national conference in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was privileged enough to listen to his story and was so impressed that I desperately had to invite him to come and speak to our group. And it's been many, many months, but he's finally here, and he's obviously in Hawaii, so he's had to get up early this Sunday morning. So it's absolutely very special to have him with us. Shaun has experienced a number of spiritually transformative experiences and near-death experiences, and he's had some very powerful after effects. And all of these experiences have really woken him up to his true spiritual nature and to his purpose in this lifetime. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Shaun so that we can hear his experiences directly from him. So without further ado, welcome, Shaun. It's wonderful to have you join us today. How are you doing?
Thank you. Doing wonderful. Thank you, Angie and Mike and everyone. Aloha. Nice to see you all. And this is really an honor, so thank you. I just can't believe when you invited me a year and a half or 2 years ago that it's already been that long. It's like, wow, time is really flying. So I'm just really honored to be here. And as many as you know, I lead Hawaiian IANDS, but I never set out to lead Hawaiian IANDS. I didn't know anything about near-death experiences. I was having all kinds of experiences, but didn't really understand what they were. So I will give you a little bit of background on me to put everything in perspective. I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was born into a LDS Mormon family. But we were Jack Mormons, if you guys have ever heard of that, which means members, but not always practicing. And anyway, I was born with immune system issues and asthma, and I would get bronchitis all the time. And so my first NDE, which I didn't know at the time when it happened, was when I was 6 months old. And I was in the ICU and an oxygen tent, and they didn't think I was going to make it out. And of course, I don't remember any of the details then, but from then on, I had this connection to the other side that was really strong. And I knew things that I knew were not from me. And I started developing all the clairs, and I would get lots of messages and just have this connection from a really early age. I knew that I was being watched over. I knew that I could communicate with the guides, but unfortunately, I also was in this Mormon family that was very dysfunctional. My mom herself had had an NDE in 1975, which, as most of you know, is the year that Raymond Moody actually defines near-death experience. So she didn't know what it was, and she was not happy to come back. And it caused her a lot of mental illness. She was actually in some mental facilities and developed prescription drug problems, and just was not really happy to be alive. And in fact, her father, when he passed on, she would always call for him to come and get her. So it was kind of a traumatic childhood. And my dad was an alcoholic and narcissist. And so there was a lot of abuse and trauma in our family, which started leading me to not necessarily trust. You know, my guides were telling me one thing. I would see things that were going to happen, but my parents would tell me something else. And so I was also a highly sensitive kid, which back then they didn't know that highly sensitive was a personality trait, but now many of you know it is. And so being a highly sensitive empath in a hugely dysfunctional family was really challenging for me. And, you know, even though I had this deep sense of knowing that was not coming from me, I started not trusting messages. And, you know, I could always predict things that when they were going to happen. You know, I saw that our boat was going to be robbed, and I was like 6 years old, and nobody listened to me. And sure enough, it was robbed. And then a year or so later, I had this premonition that this giant dump truck was going to tip over. And sure enough, this dump truck almost tipped over on me and my sister. And, you know, later things, I would predict things, but because I was never listened to, I literally stopped trusting myself. And as I started getting older, I don't know if any of you know about gaslighting and trauma, but it can really, you know, it can really confuse you and make you not necessarily trust what you're seeing. So I was experiencing that. And like I said, as I was getting older, I just stopped trusting the voices. And all I knew is I needed to get out of Utah. And so I moved to California as soon as I could. Oh, I want to back up. So yes, with all this disharmony in my family, I started experiencing these dark entities, which you might have heard people talk about before. They're like in the night, and they're like dark blobs, or some people call them like shadow people. And I started experience those, and it was getting quite bad. And I experienced them for a few years. And that's when I was able to at least regain somewhat connection with the other side. And I was able to stop these entities that had bothered me for about 3 years. And then I left and I went to California. But I need to say a little more about my mom. So my mom, even though she had all these issues, she was very connected to the other side as well. And she took me, she wasn't the normal Mormon mom. She would take me to learn like astral projection, and we went and learned iridology and pendulums, and she was a master astrologer. And she would do the charts all by hand. And she did everyone in our family's charts. And if somebody was going to date somebody, or you're going to bring home a friend or whatever, she would always do their charts. Well, when she did my chart, she had a lot of things in it. And this was probably about 9 years old. But the thing that really stuck out is she said, when you're 50, something major is going to happen. You could die, but whatever it is, it's going to be life-changing. And she didn't want me to be fearful, but she just wanted me to know that this could happen. And I'll just tell you right now that that was when I ended up having my last profound NDE, is when I was 50 years old. I was in the ICU on my birthday, but I'll tell you more about that in a while. So it was like my mother, she knew, even though she had all of these issues, it was almost like she was preparing me for all of these things that I was going to experience more of as I got older, without even really knowing it. So I moved to California, and I moved up to Santa Barbara, and I decided to start going to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really have a purpose. So I started studying philosophy and comparative world religions. And that's where I met this woman this Oxford educated Brahmin Indian lady that became like, if you could have a guru in the US, it was her. And this lady just opened me up to everything spiritually. She taught me about Vedanta and took me to the Vedanta temple, and I learned about Yogananda. And about that time is also when I met Marianne Williamson, and I started getting into the Course in Miracles. And, you know, growing up in Salt Lake City, Utah, very conservative, and then exploring all of this other things, it really started to open me up. And so that's when the first time I was going to a Trader Joe's, and I was 19. I'd been doing all this stuff with this lady. She was also my professor for comparative world religions. And I was going to Trader Joe, and I got out of the car and I spit out my gum on the asphalt. And as I was leaving the car, I heard the voice, and it said, "Pick it up." And I hadn't heard this voice for a long time, like since I was a kid, right? Because I kind of stopped trusting it. And the voice got louder and said, "Pick it up." So I still wasn't listening, walking towards the door. And the closer I got to the door, the voice got more firm, "Pick it up." Well, by the time I got to the door, the voice was so firm, I had to go back. And I went back, picked up the gum, threw it in the trash. And the voice said, "How can you do the big things I ask of you if you can't do the little things?"
Wow.
So to me, that was pretty amazing to have that experience. But because I still had a lot of trauma and a lot of issues going on, I had this spiritual connection on one hand, but I needed validation. And I found out that I was really good at school. And so rather than going through the philosophy and comparative world religions, I decided to do marketing, and then I got into finance and then real estate. So I got all these degrees, graduated with honors. At the time, I didn't realize it was because I needed validation, you know, and I was looking outside of myself for validation and ways to feel good. And so I then got into doing modeling and had like a perfect six-pack body and did Gold's Gym commercials, and then had a landscape company, and I started investing in all this real estate. And by 30, 35, I was like what this world would call successful. I thought I had everything that I wanted, but I realized I was not happy, and I didn't know what my purpose was. And it was nice making the money, but it wasn't fulfilling me in any way. So I had a house, cabin in Big Bear Lake, California. And I went up there for the holidays, and I was all excited because I'd made a bunch of money and just put in all new Viking stainless steel appliances, and they were just beautiful. And I'd gotten a new Hummer, and I had satellite radio, and this is 2003, and it snowed. So it was like the perfect Christmas, like everything I could want. And as I was driving around the lake, and you know, there's fresh snow, and I was listening to Cher, the song Believe, if you've heard that song, Believe. And so I had everything that I thought I wanted in this material world, but I was not happy at all. I was miserable, in fact. And that's when I said, is this all there is? Well, 2 months later, I went to Hawaii, and I looked for some property that I was going to buy. And the weird thing is the minute I got there, I had this like premonition, like this sadness, like I couldn't figure it out. Like, you know, I'm in this beautiful tropical place, and get ready to buy like beachfront, oceanfront property. Yet I had this like deep sadness and I didn't know what it was. So that's when I started, I met what in Hawaii we call amakuas, which is a god, like a personal god. And it can be a ancestor or another spirit that is there to guide you. And for me, it was the pueo, which is an owl. And every time I would see these owls, like I could tell like this sense of this foreboding sense, something major is going to happen. Well, I went back to California and then I came back to Hawaii about a month later. And as the plane was taking off, so I told you I used to do modeling and acting, and I did commercials for Gold's Gym. Well, I'd given myself an abdominal hernia, not realizing how dangerous those are. And so it just looked like I had an extra ab, and I would joke about it, but did not know how serious they are. And as the plane was taking off from Los Angeles, my hernia strangulated. And it was in my abdomen, so it kinked. So nothing could go through. So the whole flight from Los Angeles to Honolulu, I was just literally dying. And then I got to Honolulu and stayed here for a day or so, and then went to the Big Island. And back then I was all into holistic medicine and herbs. I didn't do Western medicine. And so I went to a holistic doctor on the Big Island. My chest was turning black and blue. She should have known, what was going on. I should have known. And so by the time I went to the ER, it had been 4 days. And most people die within 24 to 48 hours. And so I went to the ER. And they immediately knew what was going on. And so they're wheeling me in, and the doctor's like, I don't know what I can, I don't know what we're going to find. We're going to do our best to save you. And I'm sitting there actually begging because I'm out on the Big Island in Hilo, and it's like very old jungle, like hospital. It's nothing compared to what we have in Los Angeles. And so I'm begging with the doctor. It's like, can't you just somehow get me back to California? And he's like, no, you may not even make it the next hour. And so before I know it, all of a sudden I'm leaving my body and I'm in this dark space. And what's weird is somehow intuitively I knew that, oh, I'm dying. But I was like, no, there's no way I can die. I can't die here in this jungle hospital, and I'm not going to accept it. So there was a guide or somebody that was there, and the bright light was up to the right. And I'm in this darkness, and all I knew is I couldn't die. And so I kept saying to this, which I think was like a guide or somebody, because, they say that there's always somebody to greet us, but whoever it was, I didn't know who they were. And I'm literally begging and saying, I can't die. If I die, I won't accept it. I'm going to be a ghost and I'm going to haunt this hospital. And nobody will find me because we're out here in the jungle in Hilo, Hawaii. And so I ended up going to the light. It was very quick. And before I knew it, I woke up in the hospital and my stomach was completely open. And they'd had to cut out like 7 feet of necrotic intestines. And I was all full of bacteria and stuff. And so they said I couldn't leave for 6 months. And all I could think is, I can't stay here for 6 months. Like but I couldn't fly. The stomach had to stay open because it was all the bacteria. They couldn't close it up because then the bacteria would breed. So they had to leave it open. So I said, okay, if I have to stay here, I want to recover by a waterfall. So the next day, Homes and Land magazine had 3 houses on 8 acres, the most beautiful botanical estate you could imagine, with private rivers and waterfalls and every kind of tropical plant. It was absolutely amazing. And so when I got out of the hospital, about 10 days later, I rented this place. And then within a month or so, I worked out a deal with a lady to buy it. And I never went back to California. I sold all of my stuff, all my real estate online, and did not go back. I never saw any of those houses again. And so as I was slowly recovering, I was starting to have more and more spiritually transformative experiences, but those pueos were still everywhere. And they were still, I could just, every time I would see one, it was like I knew something major is going to happen. And I went through about 2 years of, everything was pretty much great. And the real estate values were going up, and Steven Spielberg rented my property, and they did Indiana Jones on my property. So I got to meet all these stars and, and the directors and producers, and it was really cool. And it was right before they started filming on my property, the voice came to me and it said, "Get ready." And it's so weird. All it said was "get ready," but I knew what it meant. And it meant for me I need to get stronger in my spiritual practice, because things are gonna get more heavy. And so then, if you might remember, in 2008, 2009, we had the financial collapse, which was even much worse on the world's most volcanic island, Hawaii Island, which is where the volcano is. And all of my real estate, everything went to nothing. And again, the voice said, "Get ready." Except now it said, "You're going to lose it all." And so systematically, everything that could happen, I used to be in flow. I used to be able to make all this money, and, everything was like pretty easy. And now it was like the opposite. Like I couldn't sell, I'd find buyers and they would flake out, or like nothing worked. And that's when I started learning what the dark night of the soul is. I'd never had one. I didn't know what they were, but I started experiencing that. And around the same time, my dad sued me. My relationship went away. It just got worse and worse. So in 2011, I pretty much walked away from that property. And I moved in with this healer lady, which back then I didn't realize, because I didn't know really anything of all this healing modalities and crystals and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that wasn't my world. My world was like marketing and finance and real estate. Even though I'd had this spiritual connection, heard the voice, I still was not part of that healing world. So it was pretty cool living with her, and she really taught me a lot, which I now realize was preparing me for what was going to come. So I left the Big Island and moved to Oahu with one suitcase, whereas I had like 3 houses full of property on that property that I left, or 3 houses full of real estate, which I just left. And Um, went to Oahu thinking I'm going to recreate myself. I made all this money before, I can do it again. Well, literally, I used to make $50,000 a month easy. Now I'm in Honolulu. I can't even make $1,500 to pay my rent. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going the opposite of flow. Like I wasn't supposed to make the money anymore. And so what I started realizing is like the layers of the onion being peeled, everything of this world that meant something to me was going away. Literally my animals, my relationships, everything that I thought I cared about went away. So in the fall of 2005, 2015, my mom passed away. And literally within 24 hours of her passing away, I was a little distraught because she's in Utah, I'm in Hawaii. I can barely make any money, let alone afford to go to Utah for the memorial and all that stuff. And I didn't know what to do. Well, she came to me within 24 hours. And at first I wasn't sure, like, is this me or is this her? So I doubted a little, but she said, you don't need to go to the funeral. And she showed me this beautiful garden because my mom was a florist and I was a landscaper, and we both just loved plants. And we used to hang out in gardens all the time. That was our favorite thing to do together. And so she showed me this garden and these big tall pine trees, which was kind of weird because they looked like pine trees in Utah or Big Bear, not Hawaii. But I saw this image of her sitting on a log with these pine trees. And she said, this is where I'll be. Come find me here. So I had no idea, like what is she talking about? Where is this place? And I just knew, okay, I'll find it eventually. And so for the next few months, I would ask her, like, why are you here? And all she would say to me is that I'm here to be the mother that I couldn't be for you when I was alive. And what was really cool is because she had all these issues when she was alive, and there was a lot of animosity between me and my brothers and sisters against, with my mom. And she started showing me her life. And she showed me what it was like when she was born, and her parents were older. They'd already raised their kids, so there was a lot of dysfunction because her mom wasn't real too happy to have another kid. And so there was a lot of abuse for her. And so when she started showing me like the 360-degree view of her whole life, all of a sudden I understood. And so what was really cool is that we were starting to develop this relationship that we couldn't have when she was alive. And it's like forgiveness, except there's nothing to forgive. Once you see the whole 360-degree view of how somebody is, you realize like there's nothing to forgive. So I luckily have that relationship with my mother because of this. And so as we're going on, and what was interesting, so my mom, remember I told you about the dark entities. When my mom, she would get possessed, and she told me this, she couldn't handle life, especially if she did the drugs, the prescription drugs, she would check out and these entities would come in. And growing up, that's what I thought. And I would joke to my sister saying, uh-oh, mom's getting ready to spit pea green soup, making a joke about, if you remember The Exorcist. And so from the other side, she confirmed to me that what I saw was real. And she explained why it happened and how it happened. And so one day I got on my computer, and this was about 3 months after my mom had died, and I was typing to my sister, and she was the only one that I had told that my mom had come to me. But it was really hard to tell her because I thought she's going to think I'm crazy. And so anyway, I'm typing an email to her about my mom and to tell her that my mom showed me that all the times I thought she was possessed, she really was. And so as I'm typing, all of a sudden my mother grabbed my left arm. And you all know what your mother's touch feels like. Even if it's from the other side, you know it's your mother. So she grabbed my arm, and I kept typing as I started crying. And I was literally, my mom's giving me information. I'm typing it to my sister, and she's holding on to my left arm. So what was really cool about that is I need a lot of proof for this stuff. And about an hour later, I went to make an espresso. And when I went to the coffee machine, the hair on my left arm was standing straight up, and the hair on the right arm was just laying down. So I'm like, wow, this is proof. This is really happening. So where I make my coffee, it looks out a window, and it looks up to this mountain. And my sister was coming to visit, and we were gonna go do some hikes. And we wanted to do some new things that we hadn't done before. So we went to this one area here. It's called Manoa Falls, and it's the oldest inhabited valley on this island. And we were under this big banyan tree, and all of a sudden I started feeling like really like vertigo, and I didn't know what it was. And as we were driving through this valley, I was getting more and more dizzy. What I later learned, which I'll tell you now, is that in Hawaii, we have all these portals, and some of you might know about the different vortexes, like Sedona's a vortex. Well, Hawaii is a vortex, and Mount Shasta. But within the vortex of Hawaii, we have all these little portals. And they are, my understanding, is where it's easier for people from the other side to come through. They can come down easier, and we can raise our vibrations easier. So I did not know that at the time, that that's what I was feeling, but I later learned about that. And so anyway, we ended up heading up this mountain, which turns out to be the mountain that I always look at outside my window. And we're only going, it's like 3,000 feet, and I'm getting dizzier and dizzier as we get up there. And I kept saying to my sister, this is so weird. Like, it's only like 3,000 or 4,000 feet. I had a house at 19, or 9,000 feet, 10,000 feet. And, I can't believe, so we get there and we park in this park. And I get out of the car, and I immediately do like a face plant on the ground. I'm so vertigo and just not feeling right at all. Like, almost like I'm coming out of my body. So it turns out in this park, there's all these tall pine trees that look like they would be in Utah or Big Bear, and they're actually called Cook Island pines. So they're a tropical pine tree. And so as we're walking in this forest, and there's a trail, and it started feeling familiar, like what my mom had shown me almost a year before, when she said, so as we're walking along, my sister's in front of me, and on the left-hand side, I look over, and there's my mom sitting on the log that she had told me almost a year before to find her. And I immediately burst into tears. My sister could not see her. And so we hurried, and we were taking photographs of the areas to see if, maybe she'll show up as an orb or something, so that, my sister could see. But so my communications with my mom were getting stronger and stronger like that. But again, she wouldn't tell me why she was here. She just kept saying to be the mother she couldn't be when I was alive, when she was alive. So, so I developed this relationship with her stronger. And then there was a fire here in a building across the way from me. And it was on a Friday, and some people died. And on the next Saturday, I was laying there on my bed. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't meditating. I was just kind of like in between. And all of a sudden, this blonde, a blonde guy wearing a blue Aloha shirt comes in my condo. And he comes with this older woman, like his mother, who looks like she's like in a wheelchair. I can tell she's disabled. And these people are completely lost and distraught. And this is the first time I'm seeing spirits like this other than my mother, which I'd just seen that once. And it was funny because this shows you how I have had no experience with this kind of stuff. And it dawned on me, because they were totally confused. They died in a fire. And I didn't know what to say. Like, I was so, like, I didn't know, say, go to the light or anything like that. I just didn't know what to do. So I said, I'm sure there's got to be somebody here who can help you. And so they went away. And on Tuesday, the newspaper, they did the coroner's report on the people that had died. And sure enough, blonde guy, blue Aloha shirt, worked for Aloha Airlines. And that was his disabled mother who was in a wheelchair. And because the elevators were shut down in the fire, they couldn't get out. And so they hid under the bed and died of smoke inhalation. So I started having more and more experiences like that. And then in the fall of 2017, I started getting sick. And like I told you, previously, I tried to do just herbs. I had lots of great Chinese herbs that always helped when I would get bronchitis or pneumonia. And it was October 2017. And it started getting really bad. And so I grew up in Utah, Salt Lake City. A lot of people, you may or may not know what Copenhagen snuff is, but you're from Virginia, so you probably do. So I never wanted to do it, but I started it when I was 16 and I couldn't stop, because it's nicotine, right, in your gum. And what I didn't realize is that I was using that to like anesthetize myself and not feel certain things. And I also drank. Well, the voice came and it said, stop hurting yourself. And I'd been chewing tobacco since I was 60. I'd tried everything to quit. I couldn't quit. But when that voice said, stop hurting yourself, I stopped. I never have done that, Copenhagen or drink again. And I'm still getting sicker and sicker, and my oxygen's going down. And because I've been used to having these different illnesses throughout my life, I'm kind of used to a certain level of pain and discomfort. So I didn't realize how, once again, I'm dying. And it started getting to the point that I couldn't walk. I was a real mess. So, and I had no money and I had no insurance. And it's like, what am I going to do? So by January, I was such a mess. I had to call a doctor office, and they came and got me, and they took me to their clinic, and they could tell right away, we don't know what's wrong with you. They called an ambulance, and then they took me to the emergency room. So get to the ER, and I can't breathe at all. My oxygen's like 20-30%, like really, really low. Like the alarm goes off if it drops below 82, the oxygen saturation. I was like, I couldn't keep any air. And I was just getting worse and worse, but they couldn't figure out what was going on. So they were getting ready to move me from the ER to the ICU, but the ICU, they didn't have an opening yet. So they moved me to this other room. And when I was in this room, it's in this hospital, downtown Honolulu. Look, the windows look out over the downtown. And this nurse came in who was kind of Filipino, Hispanic. And all of a sudden, this woman changes. And she's now wearing a nun habit. And when I look out the windows, I'm not looking out at downtown Honolulu. I'm looking out over this countryside, which at that point, I thought it had to be like Spain. Only it's like 400 or 500 years ago. And so the nurse, as she's like now this nun, thanks me. She said, I want to thank you for helping me fulfill my purpose of helping souls cross over to the other side. And I thought, I'm not dying. I can't be dying. But what was even more wild is I'm sitting there a mess in this hospital bed, and she's cleaning me up and cleaning my sheets, and she's sitting there thanking me, like when I should be thanking her. And so you guys have probably heard that a lot of NDErs, there's a lot of people that speculate that you see what you believe, you know. Remember, I was raised Mormon, certainly not Catholic, didn't know anything about these saints. Well, it turns out that was Saint Teresa that was with me. And I didn't understand why. I didn't even know it was her right then. It took about a month or so after I got out of the hospital is when I saw a picture of her and learned that that's who it was. But I didn't understand what that meant or why she was doing that. But what's amazing is I was in this basilica, this like cathedral with her looking out over the Spain countryside. So I'll tell you more about that as because she's become much more relevant in my life, but I didn't understand why. So I then was going in and out of consciousness, and before I knew it, they're like, we're gonna have to give you a tracheotomy or put you on the ventilator. And I didn't want them to do anything until my sister came. So luckily that sister, she was gonna be going to Kauai, and she flew to Honolulu. And so I waited for her to come. I was completely unconscious then and going in and out of my body. And then the next thing I remember waking up, and they'd intubated me, and there was like tubes going to my heart, and they couldn't even see my lungs. They were just like completely filled up with several different kinds of thick mucus that was like cement. And my lungs were collapsing, and I had to sign all those documents, and they were having me sign that they wouldn't keep me on the life support for, if it got to a certain point, and had to do the power of attorney. Well, as I'm strapped down to this bed, because I had the tube in, and basically I'm strapped down because I have all these things going in my veins and into my heart and stuff. And there was a 90% chance that I was not gonna make it. So my sisters went and they threw away everything in my apartment. And I was going in and out of consciousness, but all of a sudden my mother's there again, and I'd had a nephew who had died of cystic fibrosis in 2007. And he was there, and some of my other relatives were all there. And I would leave my body at will. I could go up, and all of a sudden I'm with God and my mom, and I'm one with them, but I'm also separate. And the thing that was so amazing in that particular moment is when I was with them, I was looking down at my body. And that was the first time in my whole life I had compassion for myself. I just remember thinking, oh, you poor thing, what have you been thinking about yourself? Because it was in that moment that I realized everything that I believed about myself and the world was wrong. And all of those false thoughts, not good enough, it was all wrong. And I just literally, and I still always look back at that, because that was the first time in my whole life that I felt compassion for myself. And this absolute love with my mom and God. And God was just a big, bright, white energy. And I could be merged with them, but I could also be separate. So for the next, I was on life support for a couple of weeks, and my sisters couldn't handle it, understandably. So my one sister would leave, and she'd go to the coffee cart and get espresso and stuff and call her husband. And so I would just leave my body and go follow her. And then the other sister would go to the cafeteria, and she'd get egg salad. And so I'd go and watch her do that. And then when they were trying, because they still didn't know what was wrong with me, other than I've got some major kinds of pneumonia. And they thought, they were gonna do drilling for bone marrow to see if I had, some sort of cancer or something. And it was interesting because when they were doing that, I just told them all, I'm like, okay, I'm checking out. And I would just go float over the beach in Waikiki and just leave my body, and while they would do their thing. And so at some point, I'd signed all those papers that I wasn't going to stay on life support for very long. If there was no hope, then they could take me off of it. So it was getting down to that, there's not much more we can do. We don't want him to be, the longer he's on this, the harder it is to get off. And so they thought, well, we can maybe do a tracheotomy. And so before I say that, I have to say, I started hearing this song real quietly in the room, and it's literally yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Tell your heart to beat again. It was all like about, rebirth and letting go of the past. And I just remember hearing it lightly. And then, as they're getting ready to take out the tube, and they don't know if I'm going to be able to breathe or my saturation level, but we got to see. And so as they're starting to take out the tube, my nephew, who had died of cystic fibrosis, all of a sudden he appears at the end of the bed and up. And what he does is, if you remember that foghorn leghorn cartoon, he puffs up his chest. He was showing me that cartoon. And he's like, do that, puff up your chest. And he's like literally showing me how to breathe. So he's showing me to puff up my chest, and he puffs up his chest. And as the tube is coming out, he puffs up his chest, telling me to puff up mine, and he breathes into me from the other side. And I could breathe. The saturation didn't stay, so I had to put on a mask, but I could breathe. I could actually breathe. And I will tell you, after not being able to breathe for so many months and then being on that ventilator, it was almost like a high. And in fact, for about 6 months later, I could get almost a serotonin rush just by breathing in, because it felt so wonderful, but my saturation was still like way down. So I had to stay in the ICU for another like 2 or 3 weeks. They still didn't know what was going to happen because my lungs had collapsed. And they finally found some drugs that seemed to be working on the pneumonias and a little bit. But it took another couple weeks. And again, I would just, like, when my sisters would leave, I'd leave my body. And there was no guarantee yet that I got to stay, because they were giving me the choice if I wanted to stay, but it wasn't set in stone. And by this time, I was having to learn to breathe again. But I had to learn how to eat again. I had to learn how to sit up again. Had to learn how to walk again. My whole body had shut down to die. So I got moved to a regular room, and that's what I started learning, is how to do all those things again. And I have to tell you, there are so many angels in the hospitals. Because I got to the point where I couldn't tell who's alive and who's not. All kinds of, and they would be giving me blessings and all kinds of, it was the most amazing experience. So I finally started, as I had to be able to walk a certain amount, because there was 2 choices. I was either going to go to a convalescent care home, like a state-run convalescent care home, or if I could walk enough, I could go to this rehab of the Pacific Hospital, and they could help me learn to do more. So I keep hearing that song every once in a while. Tell your heart, yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Tell your heart to beat again. And so I went with the PT, the can't think of their name, PT and OT, and they,
yeah.
Pardon me?
So physical therapist and occupational therapist?
Yes, thank you. Yes. And anyway, so I have this walker, and we're walking down the hallway, and they've got my oxygen and 2 people on each side. And the most wildest thing happened. I left my body while my body's walking with that walker, And all of a sudden, I'm back here behind me, and I'm looking down, and I'm watching my body on this walker. And again, it was that feeling of compassion, but also like, wow, this is wild. How is that body moving? Because I'm not in it. But again, just this compassion, watching myself and knowing that it was all these false beliefs that helped contribute to get me there, to that ICU. And so I kept having all kinds of experiences like that, in and out of body experiences. And the songs, that same song started playing. And so, I would just be sitting there, and all of a sudden I'd hear "Shattered Like You've Never Been Before," "The Life You Knew in 1,000 Pieces" on the floor. And words fall short in times like these, when the whole world drives you to your knees. You think you're never going to get back to the you that used to be. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. And this song would just keep playing. Well, so now I've made it so that I can walk enough to get to the rehab hospital. So now we're waiting for the rehab hospital to get an opening. Well, this janitor comes in and gives me the most amazing blessing. Like, and he's, to the world, he's just a janitor. To me, it was like I have an angel there. And so he pulls the curtain, he's giving me a blessing, and he said, they're going to have you a bed by this afternoon. So sure enough, they did have a bed by that afternoon. The medical transport took me to the rehab hospital. And the rehab hospital, it's like an ambulance. And as it's pulling out of my hospital to go to the others, guess what song starts playing on the radio? "Shattered Like You've Never Been Before," "Yesterday's a Closing Door." And I texted my sisters. I'm like, this song is literally following me everywhere. And so I went to the rehab and was there a few weeks. And then I got to come home after being in the hospital I went there in January. I got home at the end of March, beginning of April. And I got to spend the weekend at home. And Monday morning, I had to go back to the doctors. So the medical transport was down there, and I went downstairs, and the doors opened to the medical transport. And what song is playing on the radio again? The same song. "Close your eyes, breathe it in, let the shadows fall away. Yesterday's a closing door, you don't live there anymore." And it was like, what I didn't realize is that was going to be the beginning of many of my guides sending me songs. Like, I have a whole playlist now of songs from the other side where they communicate. And it happens other ways too. It can happen in art or, just different ways they communicate. But it started with this song. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that NDE, what it was for me. And for me, it was more of a rebirth than an NDE. I really felt like the worst parts of me, I left in the ICU. Those false beliefs and and I brought some with me, but most of them I left there. And it really felt like the phoenix, that saying, the phoenix rising from the ashes, because it was as if it was like I'd been through this whole fire of losing everything. And what I realized, I had to lose all that stuff in order to actually give up that stuff, to to learn and experience what's real. And for me, what is real is the other side and all of the help that we have available to us. And so for the next 2 years, I started just calling them a gang because I had my mom and my nephew and several other entities. And then I was meeting literally angels in bodies, disciples, as homeless people. And it was weird because I found myself getting so protective of houseless people because I literally met some of these people that they're like disciples. They look to the world like a homeless people, but and so I was going to these support groups because I needed to talk to people who had been through what I'd been through. And so I was going to these support groups for people with terminal illnesses and people that had ongoing stuff that they were dealing with. And I had the most amazing experience there. I was sitting in this group, a support group, and this guy that wasn't even supposed to be there, he came, and it was this black guy, and he comes in and he's talking to the people in the group. And as he's talking to the people in the group, all of a sudden I could feel him communicating with me telepathically. And I said to him telepathically, "Are you communicating with me?" And as he's talking with all these people, he like shakes his head like this. "Yeah, I am." So it was wild. So I knew I got to know who this guy is. Well, so after that group, we went and he needed to go get some blood tests. So I went and walked with him down to the place that does the blood test. And we did that. And then we were walking around and he's literally starts telling me, he says, "You have been doing a lot of praying." He says, "I want you to know your prayers are being heard." He then started telling me about, he didn't know anything that I'd been through. And, I've had some experiences, those dark entities when I was young. And then there was some of that when I was in the hospital each time. And this guy said, he said, "Do you know those dark entities that you thought were around in the hospital?" Which I never told him this. I didn't say this in the sharing group. He says they were. That was real. And he then starts to proceed to tell me about something with my sister and how I need to ask her forgiveness to forgive me for what I think I need her, that I need from her. So he's basically telling me to give her what I think I need from her. And when he started telling me that, I knew this is not just an angel. Like we're talking, this is, archangel, I don't know. All I know is the stuff that he told me that day. And then he started to say, "You're going to be telling her story." And back then I was like, no, I didn't even understand what had happened to me. And I'm like, people are going to think I'm crazy. And it was weird because I knew deep down, yeah, I'm supposed to tell my story of what has happened. But for this guy to say that, and then he said, "You're going to be leading these big groups." And it was weird because, again, deep down, I felt like that was true. But the small me then, like the reluctant messenger that's like, no, I don't want to be out talking about this stuff that, everyone's going to think I'm crazy. So I basically went through 2 years of situations like that. And with literally living angels and the stuff that my mother, at first, when she was coming to me, it was like overwhelming. like, because I wasn't used to that, which is, by the way, the reason I was all dizzy is I later learned that that's like, like if you've ever heard of ascension sickness and it was because like basically my pineal gland, is opening up. And so it's like, if you don't use a muscle or you haven't used it really, it can make you feel like vertigo. So that's what all that was. And so at first, because she was really powerful when she'd come through, it would like wear me out, give me like headaches and stuff. But I got a lot better at, I think she toned it down and I brought it up so I could communicate with her more. And the things that I started learning from the other side, and then I'd go meet professional mediums and stuff, and everything I'm learning from my mother on the other side is true. And it just started really blowing my mind. And it's like, because she really was being the mother she couldn't be when she was alive. She's teaching me all kinds of amazing stuff. Not only that, she got me out of the hospital and I wouldn't have gotten out of the ICU. So I was at home and I had a period where the home physical therapists, there was something wrong with the insurance. So I was without them for a month or something. So I still had this walker and I was bound and determined to get off this walker. And so what I would do is I'd carry it and walk up and down the hallway. And then if I got weak, I'd put it down. Well, one day I was walking through the hallway doing that and I got really weak. And all of a sudden I went to tip over. She grabbed me. My mom literally grabbed me from the other side so that I wouldn't fall and like righted me up. That was so wild that they can do that from the other side. So after an NDE, for those of you that have had one, you know that like you just want to do everything. Like for me, everything that I've never done, it's like yes, yes, yes to everything. And so Cyndi Lauper was going to be playing here. They were doing the premiere of Hawaii 5-0 and the new Magnum PI on the beach here in Waikiki. And she was going to sing and some of her songs on the ukulele. So I wanted to go to it. And this is the cool kind of stuff my mother would do from the other side and still does. So, I'm like, should I go? Prayed and called an Uber and went. The Uber takes me, turns out there's a red carpet thing, because it's a premiere. The Uber drops me off right at the red carpet. I've got my walker. I get out and I go down that red carpet and nobody stops me because, I'm this like crippled hunched over guy on a walker. And I went right into the VIP area and got to watch Cyndi Lauper play. And I just thought, this just doesn't happen in normal life, But these are the kind of things that she has done throughout my, since my NDE, starting before. And I'll tell you another really cool thing. She has taught me so many things. So for 2 years, the way that I was integrating, the first thing I needed to do was the Hare Krishnas. I didn't know anything about them, except that we used to make fun of them. And if you remember that old airplane movie where they'd make fun of them, but something told me there was this visiting Swami, go. So I went with the Hare Krishnas, and the minute they started chanting, it was like it brought such joy. And so I started chanting with them, and I've been chanting with them ever since. And then I also would go do to the Buddhist temples and do Vipassana. And then I would do A Course in Miracles because that was something that I'd done my whole life. But it wasn't until my NDE that it made sense. And it was like, oh my gosh, everything this book says, this is truth. And like most NDErs that don't even know what A Course in Miracles is, most of what they describe is what A Course in Miracles teaches. And so I was doing these classes, but it's kind of hard when you're in a class where these people want to have these experiences, but you've actually had them. And so it's almost hard for them to relate to you and for you to relate to them. So I really started realizing I need to talk to people who have had these kind of experiences. And the people that I was friends with, they didn't understand. They're like, well, so you had a near-death experience. Why do you have to talk about it? And people have awakenings all the time, but why do you need to talk about it? And for me, it's like, because I don't understand it. And what I didn't realize is I was actually having a spiritual emergency too. So I was literally living it, in both realities, but more on the other side, talking to dead people all the time. And so that's when, before I get to that, I got to tell you something else my mom did that was really cool. So on Wednesdays, I would go to this Unity church and they have a meditation thing. And I love their meditation there. So I would go every Wednesday and, disabled and having a little bit of trouble, but I make sure I always get there on time. Well, I'm there in the meditation and connecting with my mom and God who's in front, and it's just this big ball of light, feeling all this love. And about 10 minutes into it, I'm just totally in the zone and love. And this lady comes in late and she's noisy and so all of a sudden I'm coming out of the zone and I'm starting to feel not good feelings about this lady who was late, especially since, I got all these things going on and I can get here early and she's making all this noise. So anyway, I try to get back into it and I focus, and the light, my mom, God at the front of the chapel. And so as I'm doing that, I'm still a little perturbed about this lady over here who's late, making all this noise. And my mom, literally, she's like, focus your love on me. Focus your love on me. And then she comes around and she comes to this lady and she places the love that I have for my mom on this lady. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. That, it was just so amazing and all of a sudden, all of that annoyance and judgment and whatever on this lady was gone. So I just wanted to share that because it's it's almost magical when you have this connection to the other side like that. And so anyway, at some point I realized my life is never going to be the same again. I'm not going back to marketing and doing the real estate because actually I didn't want anything to do with them. I didn't care about my degrees, and I almost had a little dark night of the soul, and I found this great quote by Ram Dass, because I discovered him not until after my NDE, but I loved listening to him because he lived on Maui, and he had this quote in Becoming Nobody, and he says, when you spend your whole life becoming somebody, trying all these grades and status and profession, and you spend your whole life trying to become somebody, and then all of a sudden with awakening, you realize that means nothing. But there's this almost hole that all that stuff filled up, but now the spirit isn't necessarily filling it up quite as fast. And so I went through that for a little while, and I thought it was really interesting because everything from my old life, I now didn't value. I had no interest in earning money again. And, but people would ask me, they're like, you're always talking about this stuff. You know, you're always telling strangers, even talking about dead people. And that's when I realized, yeah, I'm never going to be the same. And I really do want to talk to other people like this. So that's when I started my first little sharing group here. And we met in person. And it was funny because it took me 3 times to even tell a little bit of my story. And I couldn't do it without crying. Probably took like a year to like, or more actually, to tell my story, especially the part where my nephew was breathing into me. That was really hard. But so anyway, when COVID took over, you know, we started, there was a IANDS Maui group. You know, I was doing IANDS Oahu, and there was an IANDS Maui group. And so connected with her, and then that's when I turned it into Hawaiian IANDS and connected all the IANDS. And then we've just been doing everything online. And maybe we will eventually go into the hybrids. But what I've found, so for me, these sharing groups, I run sharing groups, which are all welcome to attend, by the way. We have speaker events too, like this. But to me, it's the sharing groups. It's literally talking to other people, whether it's been they've had NDEs or Kundalini awakenings or mystical experiences or after-death communication. I really feel like that connection helps us all grow. So for me, I have now, literally just by following the breadcrumbs, finally, after my whole life, I now see my purpose and what I'm supposed to be doing it. And it's partly this, running these groups and sharing my story and helping other people share their stories. And so one of there's a prayer that's really important to me, and I'll tell you what it is. It's from A Course in Miracles, and it basically says, I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who has sent me. I do not worry about what to say or what to do, because he who sent me will direct me. I'm content to be whatever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal. So, you want me to keep going, or do you want
No, we can.
questions?
I think we should invite some questions. You've been going for quite some time. Wow, that's extraordinary. So I sort of counted 3 near-death experiences and all of that. Would you say that you've had that many, or did I miss one?
Yeah, no, there's 3, but actually I've even had more, because in the last year, I had a shared death experience with my very best friend that was wild, because I'd never had a shared death experience. I literally walked him to the other side, and which was pretty cool. But then I've had 3 more where I literally went right. I got food poisoning a couple of times in this last year, and I was so sick. I went right to the place of oneness, where that's all there is. Yeah. And it was so cool. And I come back and I'm like, I got to write about this, but I was so sick. And how do you even write something about the place of oneness when all it is, but yeah, so I've had quite a few, but there was 3 that I talked about.
Would you like to tell us about your shared death experience? We don't get to hear about those quite as often as the near-death experience.
Yeah.
And please, I want to invite everybody to ask questions. Those of you who are online, please, if you want to use the chat, feel free. Those of you who are here, we've got some pads there. Please bring your questions. Go ahead, Shaun.
Yeah, so so my best friend here, he's a Japanese guy, 4th generation Japanese, and you guys may or may not know about Japanese custom, but the oldest son pretty much is responsible for the family business and taking care of the family. And so I was doing a little bit of marketing when I was here, and he was my first client, but we just became best friends. And he was very supportive of what I was doing, and just, you know, he was my only real, you know, how we all hope to have just one really good friend. That was him. And I thought he was going to be here forever. And that's one of the other amazing things that I keep learning is I don't know anything. Every time I think I know something else happens to show that I don't. So we thought he was going to be around forever. His dad had died. He was going to put his mom in a home. And when they died, he's going to sell the family business, and we're going to like travel the world, do all this stuff. And he was quite psychic as well, but he still didn't come to any of our meetings or groups. And anyway, I hadn't seen him for a few months, and it was really important for him to come and we have dinner. So he came down and brought dinner and brought all these kind of herbs, because he has a really cool store with all kinds of healthy stuff. And we had dinner, and it was so weird because it was so nice that I just kept thinking to myself, could this be the last time? Like it was that nice that something just felt odd. And this was in February of last year. And 3 days later, he fell, he hurt his ankle, and he was taking care of his uncle, who had all kinds of, he was on like, you know, the, what do you call it, colostomy bag and all that kind of stuff. And so he was a home health aide to his uncle and his mother, plus he ran their business, and he hurt his ankle. And something happened. He put lidocaine on it, and somehow that caused bruises, and the skin broke, and it was hurting, getting infected. He didn't realize it, and it was major pain. So he texted me asking me to send him prayers and Reiki healing, because I level 3 Reiki master, and you know, send him prayers, and it turned out he got sepsis. The next night he called, and he literally said, I just got psychically slapped. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, I don't know. Within 2 hours, he was taken by ambulance to the hospital, put on life support right away. And they were giving him all kinds of antibiotics. There was nothing they could do. He was septic. And I talked to his mom briefly. And this was February 16th. And I had our Black History Month thing that I do every year. And that was going to be the next day, Saturday. So I had to go get a haircut that day. And I went and I got in the shower. And I don't know if you guys know this, but that shower, because of the water, it's a conduit. It's a great place for connecting with the other side. Like sometimes it can be almost like a temple. And so anyway, I was in the shower, so I had to go get a haircut. I'm running around doing all this stuff. All of a sudden, I'm leaving my body, and I'm with him, and I see my mom, his dad, his grandpa, his uncle, they're all there greeting him. And my mom is thanking him for being such a support, because he was the one, every time I went to the hospital, he was always there. Like literally the one person you could always count on no matter what, that was him. So she was thanking him, and I'm like, I have to go get a haircut. I have this event tomorrow. I have all this stuff I got to do. And I'm having a shared death experience in the shower. Like, it was just blowing my mind. So I'm like, okay, got to get dressed. So I get dressed, and And I'm still like half in there in that room doing my thing. And so then I head to my hairstylist, who luckily she's a medium. So when I walked in, and so before I got in, I don't know if you've ever felt a spirit when they whisk by you, but it's almost like this little breeze and you can feel it. So as I was walking in the door, I could feel him go by me with a breeze. And then I went up and she's like, "So how are you doing?" And I said, "Well," I said, "luckily you're a medium, because normally I couldn't tell somebody this, but I'm having a shared death experience with my best friend right now." And she's like, "Well, what is that like? Tell me all about that." And she's like, "I bet he's just like all excited to get out of here." And it's funny because it wasn't like that at all. It was like he was so peaceful over there. And he'd had so much stress taking care of his mother, who didn't appreciate him, because in the Japanese culture, this duty, it's a given. So it's not appreciated, it's expected. And he was not happy at all in this life. So he got to be away from that. So he wasn't even thinking about. And so they had taken him off life support, and which I didn't know. But they'd taken him off, and all of a sudden, I could tell he got a choice. If he wanted to come back, he could come back. And right after he said that, his handyman, who was a friend of his, texted me and said his heart rate's going up, like he's fighting. And I thought that was so cool, because I saw it, and now there's some proof that yes. So I get in the car, I get in Uber going back home. And remember, I told you about music. Like, I always know, like, we hear music all the time, right? But I know if it's a message, I know if to listen versus just a regular song. So we're in the Uber, and the UB40, a UB40 song comes on. I can't remember the name all of a sudden, but it said, "Should I stay or should I go? Would it be a sin?" And I knew he was literally asking me. He was asking for my permission to tell him, go. And so I said, "Go, stay over there. I'll be fine. I'm sure you'll, be with me from the other side." And within 28 minutes, his heart stopped. And it took a couple of days for him to come back. And then I didn't hear from him for a while again. And then he had to prove that he was with me and prove that he could do stronger stuff than my mom. So he started pounding on the walls. So anyway, it's just been a year now, February 16th.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So we do have a question from Melissa. If you could just hold for a moment, we'll unmute you. Thank you. There you go.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for everything you're sharing. It's really sounds like an amazing journey, to say the least. You had mentioned earlier Saint Teresa, and you said he's figured very prominently for you since. And I know you probably have 5 more days of stuff to share. But could you talk a little bit more about her? What was her what's her message? How has she? What has that meant? Like, what has been the purpose of that particular connection?
I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to elaborate. I forgot. So here's what's cool is, I have been the reluctant messenger. I would share in my sharing groups my story, but I wasn't necessarily doing it, speaking to everybody. And Trisha Barker, who I'm sure you guys know, she's a really good friend of mine. Our birthdays are similar. And so I promised her that I would tell my story first on a podcast with her. So as I was getting ready for that, I'm like, I need to go see more about St. Teresa of Avila, because what I've learned in my experience is I know that everything comes when it's supposed to happen. Like I didn't understand about reincarnation before my NDE. I believed in it after my NDE, but I didn't know any of my past lives. And I figured that then I would know them when it's time to know them, because there'd be a reason. And so that's how I was with her. So I went and I started researching her, and it blew my mind, because the countryside that I saw in the hospital was the same countryside in the Basilica de Torres where she lived and died. That it was that same countryside. And I saw the inside when I was with her in the room. We were in that basilica. So I have lived with her before and died with her there. And so we have that connection. Well, then it's like, okay, I know there's a stronger connection, and it'll come about when it's supposed to. Well, somebody sends me says, we're doing this book study, you need to do it. And it turns out it's Carolyn Miss, who will be a featured speaker at the IANDS conference. She wrote a book called Entering the Castle, which is a lighter version of one of Teresa's books called Enter the Castle. And the minute, like, I knew without even asking, like without knowing that it was about St. Teresa, like I got to do this book study. So as I started doing the book study, I started connecting with her more. She would come to me even in the meetings. She's come. And so we had this life together. I'm getting some ideas who I was in that life, but I'm kind of reluctant to say until I explore more, you know. But so she had a coma. She had a lot of health issues, and there's just so much that some of us, and I seem to be one of those people, that illness is my way of awakening. And every time I get a little too cocky or anything, something will happen to bring me down and humble me. And that was kind of her experience too. I got to tell you this really cool thing. So I was doing this podcast with this guy, and sometimes it's like I feel like, what am I doing? I don't have anything to share. Like, why am I even doing this? And so I was getting ready to do this podcast, and I had my Zoom set up. I did not have Zoom. I wasn't looking, YouTube. I wasn't looking at her. Like, and all of a sudden, so I was literally like, I meditated, I was reading and doing all the normal stuff, but I just wasn't feeling right. So anyway, all of a sudden, a woman's voice starts talking on my thing. And it turns out it's St. Teresa in some book that I've not read, not even looked at, her autobiography. And she says, if only someone would invite me to make a detailed list of all the things I have done wrong in my life. Instead, I have been asked to freely describe my spiritual practice and to record all of the blessings my Lord has showered on me. I would be so much more comfortable disclosing all my imperfections. And I just thought, wow. So yeah, she's another guide, somebody who's here to remind me that sometimes those of us that are the least perfect, you know, with all of our flaws, seem to, you know. So yeah, and there's so much more that I have to learn with her. Like it's just starting to unfold more.
Just to piggyback on that, you did mention that she was thanking you for helping souls transition to the other side, helping her help souls transition to the other side. I think.
Yeah, like it was an honor. Like that's what she was doing.
Right.
And so she's thanking me for giving her, or yeah, to give her the honor
Right.
of helping. And it felt so bizarre. Like I should be thanking you.
Right. And also she was a nun, presumably, and this was a basilica or a cathedral, obviously a holy building, a holy place, and she's thanking you. So chances are you were probably pretty high up in the hierarchy as far as spirituality in those days. If she's thanking you, right? So very interesting to see how that unfolds and what you learn about that previous life about yourself.
Yeah. So you know what? I'll just tell you guys. So
Go on.
it's only going to be on YouTube, right?
Nobody will ever know.
Right. So remember I was talking about the dark night of the soul that I had.
Yes.
So if you know much about that, that was written by St. John of the Cross. And I had a connection with him too. Well, turns out that St. John of the Cross and her were best friends. And he was younger than her. And they spent a lot of time together. And people would come in and they would find both of them just like levitating in their chairs. Like they weren't trying to levitate. It's just all these spiritual practices that she does, which by the way, if you get a chance to entering the castle, it's amazing because it's actually like a workbook, like working on different things on yourself. And so I keep getting pulled to feel like, was I him?
Ah, okay.
Because I remember being with her in her chamber. So I don't know. And I haven't done like past life in regards to him yet. It's just, I'm just kind of letting the feelings come. But I think possibly it was him.
Have you done a past life regression ever?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I have other. Yeah, I did. The first one I did was with Peter Wright. You know, he's with IANDS Santa Barbara. You met him. He's a really great guy. He does past life. And with that one, I found I was somebody else kind of important that I couldn't believe it. And so I've almost never said it, but I was a spiritual teacher back then at the time of Jesus. And it was weird because I was around Jesus. I was at the Last Supper. I was like, and I kept thinking, okay, well, maybe I was just one of the servants or something. But no, I was a spiritual teacher. So that was the first one I did with him. And then, and the whole reason we went there is I've had this issue of betrayal that I kind of felt that is not from this life, from a past life.
Oh.
And so I wanted to look at that. And this spiritual teacher, there was some betrayal going on between him and Jesus.
Oh.
So, yeah.
It doesn't begin with J, does it, by any chance? His first name doesn't begin with J, does it?
No, not Judas. No, I was not Judas.
Just wondering.
Yeah, not Judas.
Okay.
But so I did that, and then another one with another past life regression guy named Bruce Kalowski, who's really good. He lives in LA, and he was one of our speakers. So I haven't been white in many lives, and I knew that, and I was kind of getting visions. But so with him, what we did is we went to the past life that is most karmically responsible for this life. And basically, I was a Black woman in 1863, and my whole family was murdered, and I was drugged behind a wagon. And it's interesting now to see that, because as you know, I do these Black history events, and I have a connection with Indigenous people that I didn't really understand where it was coming from.
Yeah.
But now I do.
We have a question here from Melissa. Is it Peter by any chance? the denying, you'll deny me 3 times before the, oh, was it something about you'll deny me before the cock crows 3 times or something? Yeah. So.
And you want to know something funny about that? So if you know, do you know who Kelvin Chen is? He does past lives and he's a meditation guy. And because he's done things at IANDS before. Anyway, he said one of the signs is outside confirmation. So of course, the guy doing the past life, because I didn't know a whole lot about Peter. But what I will tell you is that after my NDE, I was just doing this spiritual retreat, and that story about Peter and Jesus, how much do you love me? You know, if you love me, take care of my sheep. And that really hit home to me. Like, that's the whole thing of Christianity in my mind, like, take care of your brother. So, but then there's this other guy from Tanzania, Africa. And I saw this guy on Facebook, didn't know him. And this is how it happens all the time. I'll just get an energetic king, like, you want to know this person. So I saw that I'd had a past life with this guy. I saw him, and he didn't tell me this then, but he told me about 3 months later, because I was telling him when we first met how I just reach out to people. You know, I just listen to my guidance anymore. And I said that I knew that I had a past life. And this guy said, he said, you know what I saw when I saw you? I saw Peter. So, yeah.
Wow. So Melissa says, we are kin. I have history with Peter too. We should talk sometime. So you guys should talk offline sometime.
Yeah.
So you've touched on angels. You've touched on shadow people. You've talked about your relationship with your mom since she's passed. You brought your nephew into play. You've shared about the shared death experience with your friend. Can I ask you a little bit about the shadow people that you experienced? Can you explain a little bit about, what that phenomenon is and why it's here? And is there anything about our particular state of being, our mood, that brings it on? Do we contribute in some way to these dark shadows being part of our existence?
Well, okay, so there's a few different kinds. And this is where, when, I had those big Facebook groups with over 1 million people, and which I don't have that one now, it got hacked. And then they tried to sell it back for me. And I'm like, I don't want it that much, It's 1 million people. It was a lot of work. But in that group, so many people had those experiences. So my experience with these little blobs is they were definitely not good, because I would wake up with them standing over me and on top of me, like and I'd scream, scared. And my little sister still has nightmares because her bed was in the other room, and she'd hear me screaming. Well, I did get rid of them. And literally it was just saying in the name of Jesus Christ, be gone. And if I believe, and I think it's all about your belief in whatever you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so I did get rid of them. So after my NDE, I went to LA, and my sister lives there, and this lady friend, she did what's called arcing light on me, and it's, light work. And as she was doing it, and I was leaving my body, and I'm like heading out to their Akashic records. And as I'm going out, it's like, like a spaceship almost, because you're going through the universe. And all of a sudden, I see those little blobs, same little blobs that as a kid were all around me. Only this time, they see me, I see them, but there's no fear on my side. And they know that I have no fear. So it was like they have no power over me. But I saw them again, and they knew they had no power. So in my experience, those things, I think they're just dark forms of energy that I think my parents brought around, like literally, because my dad's an alcoholic, and if you've ever heard, spirits are codependent. So an alcoholic, a spirit who died was an alcoholic, is going to be attracted to an alcoholic who's alive. And so I've seen it with my dad, and then my mom, she had her issues. So I think that's what was bringing those. Okay. So I think, but there's also, you've probably heard the shadow man, you know, they wear a hat. So a lot of people think it's just another dimension. So for a lot of us, if we're doing astral projection and we leave our body, and when we're coming back in our body, that's when we can a lot of times see them. And so I've heard all kinds of stories like, you know, it's somebody from another dimension. But all I know is a lot of people have them, and a lot of people experience when they're doing astral projection and when they're trying to come back in their body is when they see them.
My sense is if they sense that the person is feeling very low, if the individual doesn't really have a very strong faith and feels very lost, that they can come in at that point and sort of prey on that individual. If somebody is feeling good, feeling grounded, feeling strong in their faith, that somehow that's a bit of a shield that doesn't invite them in as much. I don't know if there's any truth in that.
Oh, I think you're right. I really do. And I was certainly down at that time, you know, because our house, it was bad. It was a very low vibration, lots of toxicity. My mother, when she was possessed, I didn't really add this in, she tried to kill me several times, chased me around the house with a knife. And that's where the stopping trusting myself, because my mother, she had read just enough of self-help books to turn it around, use it as a weapon. And so like she chased me around the house with a knife, trying to kill me, a big butcher knife. And we literally, there's marks in the kitchen island. And so I'm in my room. Sometimes I would call her Sybil, you know, and she's now back to, her demons have left and she's, you know, herself. And so it's not like she would apologize, but it's like, okay, she's back to her normal self now. And I'm like, I'm not ready to move on now. I'm traumatized. And she would say stuff like, well, you know, we're all responsible for our own feelings. And literally, and that was the kind of stuff that it just messed with me. I didn't realize it was called gaslighting. I didn't learn until after my NDE that I'd been gaslit my whole life. And my NDE was my way out of being gaslit.
Also, during your talk, you mentioned a few times, I think, that you had a lack of self-trust or lack of confidence and didn't feel good enough. And then I think when you were having some of these out-of-body experiences, you became very wise to the notion that that's really very artificial. That's very sort of 3D. It's not who we truly are. But it sounds as though you had to sort of go through that a few times to really understand that you are so much more than the human that you are right here, right now. And that, you know, we do tend to second guess ourselves. And it also sounded as though you were bringing on some of your own illnesses by not trusting yourself, not trusting your environment. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I was definitely, and also, yeah, 2 past lives that I know about. So this kind of interesting. I drowned in a past life, and I would have all these dreams as I was a kid that I was under the water, but I could breathe. So I eventually realized, okay, yes, you drowned in a past life. And so, you know, Louise Hay has different things, and maybe that, like bringing back some of that stuff that I hadn't dealt with is what caused all my lung issues in this life.
Oh, yes.
There's also some thoughts that not wanting to be here, you know, not wanting to live. So, you know, I know that I've created some of these illnesses, in fact, because I give so much to other people and being an empath and not protecting myself, I would just let people drain me. And I always had this need to help, always need to. And what I didn't realize is that was draining every bit of energy. And so I got a message maybe about 2 years ago, when I had like the Facebook group with 1 million people, and I had 4 groups, and then helping other organizations, IANDS, with their stuff. And I was just doing all this stuff for all these people, plus my meetings, and it was just depleting me. And I got to the point where, and I got a message like, next time you go to the ICU, you may not come back, because that was one of the lessons. So have you read the Celestine Prophecy? I don't know if you guys have read that, but
It sounds familiar. I can't remember.
yeah, it's a really cool book from the 80s.
Okay.
And they made it into a movie. You can find it on YouTube. And in this movie, they did this animated thing to show with this guy, to show how we try to take each other's energy. So if you want to win an argument and you're like dominating somebody else and you're right, they're wrong, it's a way that we take people's energy. And so this guy in the movie, when he would do that to this lady, she recoiled from him. And it was so weird because for some reason, I had to tell this to my sisters. Right, the minute the tube came out, the minute I could breathe, I made them watch it with me in the hospital. And the interesting thing is the message was for me, but what I was really trying to show them is that they had sucked my energy. And I allow people, some of us, we just, as you know, there's people out there that look for people that take their energy, and then there's people that freely give it. And I was one of those people. So, and you know who has become another one of my guides is Edgar Casey, because he had that complex too, basically feeling not worthy. And so you want to prove that you're a good person. And, his guides told him, don't do more than so many readings a day. But he went way beyond it. And he overgave from himself, which is why he died at 66, relatively early.
Tell us a little bit about the gentleman that you met in the support group, the African-American gentleman who you felt was communicating with you in the group telepathically, and then you were able to speak to him one-on-one, and he told you a number of different truths that hadn't possibly have known, and that you felt he was an angel or even a larger entity.
Yeah, honestly, what's above an angel that's not God? Like and so I have told friends this, like it could have been Jesus in a black man's body. Like, we all know that real Jesus wasn't white anyway, but I really do believe that there's all these spirits. They can come into a body at will and do whatever. Because that was the other thing. So remember, we walked around downtown Honolulu, and sometimes I think back to myself, do I look like just another crazy person talking to myself as I'm walking around downtown? But so we're walking around downtown, and when him and I are talking, I am talking to a high level being, okay? But then we went into Walmart. He needed to get some shoes. And when he's talking to the shoe guy, he can go right down and do his code switching and talk like everyday black guy right off the street. And then done with him, come back to me, upper, like high level intelligence. It was, and the thing is, I knew I wasn't going to see him again. I touched him to make sure he was real. But the stuff that he knew, like about my situation with the sister and the forgiveness issues that I had to work on, it was amazing. And I knew especially when he's telling me to do stuff, that it's like, okay, I may be, much more awake now after this NDE and feeling a lot of love, but I'm certainly not perfect and I'm not ready to do the forgiveness the way that he said. And that was the other reason I knew that I'm talking to somebody like that, because he's telling me to do something that my ego is not ready to do. And get this, so there is a quote that relates to what he says, forgive them for your sins, and you will be forgiven indeed. And that's from A Course in Miracles. And that's basically what he was trying to get me to do with my sister. And you know what he said? He says, I promise you, everything's going to happen to make you not do it. The forces out there that don't want this healing to occur is going to make it really hard. And guess what? I actually got sick so that I didn't have to do it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting also the blonde gentleman with his elderly mother who was in a wheelchair who perished in the fire, and how you saw those spirits, but didn't work with them at the time. I think I'm not sure what you said about that. They needed some guidance. They were distraught. They were lost, but you didn't help them at that point. You didn't feel you could.
I didn't. Yeah. Well, honestly, I just didn't know. It's not like I ever studied mediumship, or they call that, which I actually just found out from Trisha the other day, they call that rescue mediumship, which I didn't even know. And like literally, I mean, afterwards, I kind of felt dumb, like, of course, send them to the light. But no, I didn't know. So literally, I just said, I can't help you. I'm sure there's somebody around here that can. And that was that. But yeah, no, I didn't know what to do.
And you also mentioned there were lots of angels at the hospital. There are always lots of angels at the hospital, and you weren't sure which ones were people and which ones were angels.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Like, well, since there's, of course, so many, deaths and stuff in the hospitals, there's just a lot of spirits around. And again, they can go into bodies. And so like the janitor guy that was giving me the blessings, I don't know if the angel came in the janitor's body. I don't know how that worked, but he wasn't just a janitor giving me these blessings. Because also, I don't think they're supposed to do that. But I had so many different blessings, and I went on a handy band one day, and this black lady just gets up and putting her hands, and I mean, it was giving me tears, the blessings this lady's giving me out of the blue. And I literally would start hanging out with houseless people. And I would start talking to some of these people, and some of these people, the wisdom that they would share with me, it just blew my mind. Because it's like, I'm one of the many people that have walked by them my whole life. And it's just to think, many of these people, they're that way. They don't need all this. And it's funny, I was in one of my spiritual book studies class, and this lady, she was making a comment about homeless people and trying to make herself sound like, big, and the homeless person sound low, like they forgot who they were or something like that. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but remember the movie Alien? I felt like this alien come out of me and I'm like, or maybe you've forgotten who you were. And I couldn't believe it, that like all of a sudden I'm like defending homeless people against, but it was true. And I told her, I said, these people are in many cases living disciples. And I don't know where it is in the Bible, or maybe it was the Book of Mormon, but they talk about there are people that live the earth that haven't died, that are still here. And I don't remember where it's from or anything, but I can now say that I believe that, and I've met some of them. And yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to make my final question. Can you explain the Zoom background that you have there? That beautiful picture
Oh,
of
thank you.
Hawaii.
Yeah. So I've had this Zoom background forever. So probably like 5 years. And like I mentioned, my mom is always around. Whenever I need her, she's always, so spirits, they have guilt from the other side. Forgiveness is really important, that we forgive them. There are things that they, like with her, she is constantly apologizing for things she did. There was one day I was sitting outside my doctor's because, I have a lot of medical issues that I'm still dealing with that may never go away. But I mean, I've had miraculous healings. But anyway, I was sitting there outside the doctor's office waiting for Uber. And it was just like, I was like, this is not the life I had planned. I was a millionaire, had my amazing estate and all this stuff. And, so I was just thinking about it, like just how life is not what we plan. And, at least for me. And, or I should say that my lower self plan, because I know my higher self has been in charge of all this. But so I was sitting there and then get in the car. Sure enough, I hear a song and it's Hoot Stank. And it's like, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I never meant to do those things to you. And I heard it and I'm like, and I knew that's her, but I didn't know who it was from. Then later I go home, I watch a movie, same song comes on. So that's actually one of my newest ones that I will listen to, like before something like this. I'll go listen to that. And it just like immediately reminds me how much help that I have on the other side that supports me. So this Zoom background, so when I moved to Oahu in 2013, I found this safe little studio here in Waikiki, and that's where I was then dying. And then I recovered there and I lived there for like 10 years. Well, my landlord, she needed to sell and she was really desperate to sell right away. So I was trying to find places and I found a perfect place. I felt my mom, like, this is it. My guides, this is it. And everything's wonderful. And then it fell through. And then it happened again and again. It happened like 4 or 5 times. Meanwhile, my landlady is flipping out and she's going to evict me because she just wants me out so she can sell it. And so at the last minute, I prayed and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm losing faith here. You keep telling me this place is great and then it falls through. And I need to know you're with me. So an hour and a half later, get a call on this beautiful, great place, much better than any of the others. Beautiful views of the ocean and the canals. And I came to meet the landlords. They were incredibly nice. I get off the elevator and in front of the elevator doors is a big 12 by 12 print of my Zoom background. And I knew immediately that's a sign from her. And then from then on, everything worked out and I moved in basically the next 3 days later. So yeah, it's amazing what they can do from the other side if we'll listen and we ask. And the more we ask and the more we listen, the more we get.
That's wonderful. Including your nephew who breathed into you when the tube was being removed to help you recover. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, Shaun, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. What an extraordinary journey. And it sounds as though there's still quite a lot more to come. I thank you for sharing something about your past lives, and just about everything that you've shared this afternoon has just been really interesting. And I just love that you have such a wonderful, very real, ongoing relationship with your mom. That gives us, I think, all hope that, when our parents pass, or if they've already passed, that we can reconnect with them. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I really feel everyone can. I think the main problems, if some people can, is that they expect them to be exactly like they were when they're alive, and they're not always.
Right.
Sometimes they're quite different.
Yeah. I think a very interesting notion for therapy would be to have, the client, the therapist here, but then call in from the other side a parent who's made the child, the now adult's childhood quite miserable, to sort of try to help with the healing. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could incorporate that kind of therapy?
Well, I actually know a therapist, NDEr, that you might want to have her be a speaker, that she actually had to stop her practice because of that. Because the patient comes in, and so does all their family on the other side. And it was getting to be too much.
Oh,
but she literally, she did that. And she's spoken at the IANDS groups and events before.
Yeah.
And she plays the harp. If you've ever watched any of their shows, her name's Karen Michelle. If you want to ever check out her video, and if you are interested, she's a beautiful speaker and has had all these amazing experiences, and plays, the spirits help her play the harp.
If anybody wants to follow up with you, what's a good way for them to get in touch?
You have that bit.ly link, right?
I believe we did put that in our newsletter. Yes.
Yeah, so there's the bit.ly link, but it's also, my email is Shaun Lether @gmail. So that's real simple. Or Facebook or Instagram.
Okay.
We have a Hawaiian IANDS Facebook group, a near-death experience Facebook group, so you can find me there. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you again, Shaun.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
It was really interesting to have you. We're so thrilled. And enjoy the rest of your day. I know you're 5 hours behind, so maybe you can go back to bed now. I know we got you out of bed early today. So bless you. Thank you again. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Aloha.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.